Police officers. What's the funniest call you answered? So I was sitting in my patrol car downing a honey pack when dispatch called about a vehicle in the lake that needed urgent help. It was my first year as a cop, and I figured it would be some teenager who forgot to set their parking brake. What I found instead was the most determined drunk person I've ever encountered in my entire career. When I pulled up to the boat ramp around 2 in the morning, I could see headlights glowing underwater like some kind of submarine. The light beams shot through the murky lake water, creating this eerie green glow. Only the very tip of a hood ornament poked above the surface about 20 feet from shore. But that wasn't even the weird part. Right next to those underwater headlights was a massive tow truck. The whole front end was submerged with water lapping at the driver's door. The emergency lights on top were still flashing yellow and reflecting off the lake surface. It looked like someone tried to rescue the car and ended up joining it instead. On the wooden dock between these two vehicles was a man in soaking wet clothes. He was passed out cold and snoring loud enough to make my cheeks jiggle. Water pooled around him and his shoes made squishing sounds when he shifted in his sleep. This guy was absolutely hammered. My partner Rick showed up a few minutes later and just stood there staring. He'd been on the force for 15 years and even he couldn't figure out what we were looking at. We woke the guy up and he was still drunk enough that his story came out in pieces over the next hour. His name was Gary and he'd been at his buddy's bachelor party all night. They'd started at a sports bar downtown, then moved to someone's house for poker and whiskey. Gary decided to drive home around midnight, even though he could barely walk straight. He lived right across the lake and figured he'd take the back roads to avoid any cops. The boat ramp was supposed to be a shortcut. Gary thought he could drive along the shore to get closer to his neighborhood. Instead, he kept his foot on the gas and launched his Acura straight off the concrete ramp. We figured out later he was going at least 50 miles per hour when he hit the water. The car flew about 15 feet through the air before splashing down. It sank fast in 20 feet of water, but Gary managed to roll down his window and swim out. Most drunk people would have drowned, but this guy was determined to fix his mistake. Soaking wet and missing one shoe, Gary started walking. Not to the nearest house to call for help, not to the road to flag someone down. He walked 8 miles through the woods to his uncle's house because he remembered his uncle owned a towing company. Gary's uncle was out of town for the weekend, but Gary knew where he kept the spare keys to the tow trucks because he'd worked there one summer in high school. He took the biggest truck they had and drove it back to the lake. This is where things got really stupid. Gary decided he could fix everything himself without calling anyone. He stripped down to his underwear and swam back down to his car. In pitch black water 20 feet deep, this drunk idiot somehow found his back axle and hooked the tow cable to it. He swam back up and started the winch on the truck. The problem was physics. His little Acura was full of water and weighed way more than normal. The tow truck was on a slippery boat ramp with wet tires. When Gary hit the switch to pull the car up, the truck just slid backwards down the ramp. The truck picked up speed as it rolled backwards. Gary jumped out at the last second before it splashed into the lake. He watched his uncle's $30,000 tow truck sink until only the roof lights were visible. Then he sat down on the dock and immediately passed out.